I want to do a tier list of like every artifact because we have some new ones that just came out. The new ones are relatively good, but they're not strong, if that makes sense. Like they're not meta defining. You could actually look up the new ones. You go to the PTR, go to items, click on artifact, click this top left where it says add patch, and type in season 5, and then you can see all the new artifacts here. Most of these are decent and are interesting, but they have some quirks to them that we're probably gonna have to talk about here. That being said, let's get into it. So, Attuned Leather Pants. You got kegs in the brain, so yeah, I know. Attuned Leather Pants is like a artifact that's really used within PvE. It's a little bit used in PvP, but it's not super used. So I would say it's like a viable artifact to get and farm. You get it from completing the main story. Nothing super special about this. I mean, it gives you like a bunch of stats, but like in terms of like what you would prefer to go from a usually a light player with this build, there's 50 stats that you gain extra that need to be split amongst like multiple builds. Like effectively isn't as strong, I think, as what people want. Next patch it gets stronger because Magnify you can just throw on any attribute and this has Magnify on it. So it should be interesting, but I still think it's like viable but not very OP. Butcher is used a lot by tanks, but it's other than that, it's not used a ton. But it's still used a lot by tanks within New World. It's still used from some DPS that go for a Whirling Blade. I wouldn't say it's like incredibly good, but it's like decent. I guess it probably goes down to that viable category where it's like, used, but it's not like completely broken or anything like that. Butcher has the ability to inflict bleeds when you go for the whirling attack, so it's decent. Blood Drinker. Oh wait, the not usable and need buffs are in the wrong spot. I might need to remake this. That's not good. Could I edit the template real quick and fix that? Uh, oh wait, no. That looks right. Let me hit submit again. Hopefully we don't have to redo the whole thing. Yeah, no, okay, that's right. Wait, no. Why is not usable above needs buffs? It should be below. I have them below on here. Let me change this and hope for the best. Maybe this will fix it. And it didn't. Okay, I guess we're gonna change the bottom thing. It might be alphabetical. You can drag the roads on the right side of the tier list. Oh, you can? So I can just say submit this and then oh wait, yeah, you're right. Oops. Cool. Uh I guess they're doing alphabetical order or something like that for the sorting. But we've done Butcher, we've done Attuned Leather Pants. We got the Abyss. The Abyss, I think, is used a lot within OPR, but within War, not used a lot. Within 3v3, used a lot. Within 1v1, used a lot. In general, I would say, is like a very strong artifact to go for. The problem with it is you need to get your mana low, which turns out to be a problem when every hit is gaining you mana. So this is best used with Fire Staff for the most part. And I think I would be comfortable putting this in like the used a lot category. Winged leather shoes. This is the one that gives you haste. I know PvEers like it. I would say that it needs buffs overall just because I don't think the haste is really good enough now. They did rework it because at one point you can get infinite haste with this, and this just that overall has kind of fallen off a little bit. Winged leather shoes I don't believe has any insane perks on it, right? It's just base duration of haste on you is increased by 50%. It's not giving you a passive haste or anything like that, so yeah, I don't think it's like super strong and probably needs some buffs. Ankh is used a lot. I would not say Ankh is overpowered, which is controversial. I think a lot of people would say Ankh is overpowered, but with the recent change to how health works on Ankh, I don't think it's overpowered anymore, or how the actual perk on Ankh works. Because Ankh's perk got moved to a different bucket, it effectively is worth about 12% instead of 25%, and Divine's worth about 15% in terms of its magnitude. So I would say Ankh is like honestly kind of balanced right now, but like it's used a lot because it's like very popular, if that makes sense. Blood Drinker, I think this is a little bit worse than viable. Like, probably needs buffs. This is like a passive lifesteal effect. I think it's like in a pretty good spot, but like it feels like it needs a little bit more just to really be used. It does boost leeching effects, which is like the main benefit of Blood Drinker, but the problem is it doesn't boost every leeching effect. What I mean by that is like, say you are running a Warhammer and you have Path of Destiny. This heal that you would get from Path of Destiny from having to perk on it is actually categorized as an incoming heal, not a lifesteal, which means that it's not going to get buffed by Blood Drinker, but it's going to get buffed by Ankh. So for a lot of these builds that have like kind of a lifesteal-ish mechanic but aren't actually using lifesteal, it doesn't really make sense to use Blood Drinker. It actually makes sense to use Ankh still, which is not intended, but that's just the reality as of now. Boltcaster, I think, is viable, but it's weak. It's like one of those that's like people use it because it can get around gems, but it's relatively weak. I originally thought before the bug happened where it was doing absurd amount of damage that this would be a relatively weak weapon. And it is definitely not being used as much anymore. It's still used occasionally to get around really weird gem setups. It's like a tech swap, but it's not super popular. Creed boots, I don't think are usable at all. This is a new artifact that's coming out. It will boost your basically your first hit on a target. I don't think that's enough to really push this. A lot of people have like been like, oh, just use this with musket, but there's just better artifacts to use with musket. Like the new chest piece is better to use with musket. Attuned leather pants is better to use with musket. I don't really see a reason to use Creed boots for most builds. The 15% extra damage isn't actually 15%. For most builds, that's closer to like 7% extra damage. The extra crit chance like doesn't really matter a ton either. Like, I think if you're going to use this, it's like on a light, like super nuker DPS fire staff kind of build, and even then, like, I don't think I would use Creed boots. So I don't think this is a really usable artifact right now. Deep freeze, I think, floats between overpowered and used a lot. I would say it's probably barely not overpowered. If this was like back in the day where IG was like used all the time for that ultimate chill, it would be overpowered, but at 15%, it feels like it's about the same as going for a rapier or other artifact. Definitely is a very solid artifact to go, but I don't think is like really pushing the limits, even though we thought this would be like overpowered. I don't think this is really quite there yet. Ginge head wrap. This artifact is one that reduces dots on you. I would say that it's between need buffs and not usable. I would say need buffs because I think in OPR specifically it's okay versus like a meta where bow is super prevalent. You get it relatively easily too, which is nice, but I wouldn't say it's a super good artifact overall within a large scheme of the game. Endless Thirst, I would argue, is overpowered, even though Ankh is not, which is a little controversial. But I think Endless Thirst is just better on more builds. Some people would argue Ankh is better, but Endless Thirst, you will be able to infinitely heal a 1v10 situation with a different amulet than what Ankh is. Or if you just go for a Health Divine Protection amulet with Endless Thirst, you pop an infused regen serum, you'll be healing for about 1k per tick of the regen serum. And that just makes it very good. The thirst thing where consumables are increased in terms of their cooldowns, that does not apply to cleanse pots. It does not apply to like fire absorption potions or anything like that, which is really good. Comes with empowering toast and fortifying toast, which is really good on a legal perk combo that's very solid. And I think that it's just generally better than Ankh for most builds in the game. Like Bruiser, you probably want to go Ankh. Like in a war, if you're on point, you probably want to go Ankh. But from like most people in the game, if you're playing 3v3, if you're doing OPR, if you're doing 1v1s and you're using pots on 1v1s for some reason, or you're doing like some other form of combat like open world, like Endless Thirst will just generally be better. So I would say Endless Thirst is like in that overpowered state. It's just kind of better than Ankh. Finisher, I think, is also overpowered. Best PvE weapon in the game. One of the best PvP weapons in the game. If you're going to pick like one artifact on this entire list to acquire, Finisher is probably it. And it's just because it gives you extra damage and it's on a rapier basically. And that extra damage on a rapier is good enough to make it above average in PvP, The Deadly Flourish makes it very, very good for PvE. Highest DPS weapon in terms of single targets if you play it optimally. So very, very solid to go for. And overall, it feels a little bit on the strong side. Freedom Pants, I think they're viable, but they're just not used at all. Do you nerf Endless, it just becomes trash? Yeah, I think it does. That's the problem. It's like, it's in a weird spot where you can't really nerf it, you can't really buff it, but it feels like stronger than everything else that you can run. Freedom, this is just worth 3 freedom. I think when the artifacts first came out, I thought this would be the most used artifact, and I don't think it's a really used artifact because people are just going stone form right now. But if you don't want to go stone form, then freedom is definitely an option for you and is solid. Freya Francisca, this is a good artifact in terms of PvE. In terms of PvE, this is used a lot. Within PvP, this, if Hatchet was viable, this would probably be used a decent amount. I think it floats between viable and used a lot. I would probably, because this is mostly a PvP focused thing, say it's viable, but I wouldn't say it's like incredibly broken. The main thing with this is the CDR just allows you to go infinite if you're against a single target, but if you're missing, it's just not going to be as good. I'm fine with it being strong since so many builds can use it for Endless Thirst. Yeah. Featherweight, incredibly overpowered. Probably the most overpowered artifact in the game. Like, if we're going to put left to the right as, like, the most overpowered, and just sort that way, like, I would probably do it like this, and then, like, top would be the most overpowered if in a, kind of a tied situation. Like, I would say it's probably something like this. Probably Freya's a little bit below, actually. And Freedom's a bit below. But it's something like that in terms of all these artifacts right now. And overall, main thing that Featherweight has going for it is it just increases your base reduction by like 8% or something like that. When you consider all the heavy bonuses, you could also get access to heavy gear, which is just better because there's illegal perks in terms of defensives typically, like the Dawn gear. So again, super strong, but so many builds could use it. Yeah, but I don't think every build should use Featherweight, and right now every build uses Featherweight. If you're a light build, there's like, and you're going to pick an artifact, and you're going to be touched by any player, any PvE mob, like, you probably are considering going Featherweight, and I think that's like a bit too strong. A lot of people use Attuned. Yeah, but Attuned, like, I feel like it's a little bit more balanced, because I think defensive artifacts are just generally better. Like, and Attune's are more of an offensive artifact, but you can kind of get mobbed down. Featherweight is the reason why Koyo is Garble as well. Yeah. It, like, just completely outclasses other artifacts. Again, I don't know how you nerf Featherweight without making it trash and then buff Koya. Yeah, you can't nerf Featherweight, right? Because if you, like, you can make it, like, a little bit heavier maybe, so you can only run, like, 1 additional heavy piece versus running 2 or something like that, but it's just, it's a tricky artifact to balance, but I think it's a little bit too strong. Well, I guess Featherweight doesn't have a weight, which is why all that other stuff happens, but maybe it has a weight and it's just a really lightweight or something like that. Gilly's Gravity Gauntlets, this is a new artifact that's coming out. It's kind of interesting. The best interaction from this is if you put an ice pylon down, it'll keep the entire thing of Empower. Other than that, I think it's a little bit on the weaker side. Crush doesn't want his artifacts to be... He always plays tumblers, man. He's medium. Medium, you have to go tumblers. Gilly, I don't think it's going to be used basically at all. I don't know if it's, like, necessarily, like, super, super weak, but I think it's definitely on the weaker side. Like, it definitely needs buffs. Like, I think it's probably better than Ginge, probably better than Winged, a little bit worse than Blood Drinker, but it's, like, it's not that great. Maybe a little bit better than Blood Drinker, actually. Like, I think it's a little bit on the weaker side. Ghoul Gloves, worst artifact in the game. I don't think there's much more to say about that. It's like the Jasper on a gem, but then just worse than the Jasper gem. Yeah, basically. We love Ghoul Gloves. Everyone loves the Ghoul Gloves, but they suck. Gladiators, like, you have to use it on a DPS SNS build specifically, it feels like. And it feels like you always want to use it with the Butcher, but, like, it's just basically not usable. I don't know a single person that's, like, really made Gladiator work and has been, like, had said anything good about it. It's just, like, not really good at all. Gray Wizard Hat. You actually can run this, but it's like really niche. It's just like I think it still belongs like near the top of not usable, but it's like it's run for some builds that are experimental, but it's not run for any main build right now. Just overall is really poor. The main benefit that it had is it didn't have Magnify on it and had Intelligence on there, and Magnify is getting buffed, and I think that makes it pretty bad. Like it's near the top and not usable, but it's like it's still bad. Inferno. The problem with this is if you do it with strength, then your dots don't tick for anything, and if you do it with int, then you're not taking advantage of one of the passives, which inherently makes it weak. I think this is one that just needs buffs, but it's near the upper end of the needs buffs category. Permabugged Pog, AGS dub. Yeah, like if it wasn't bugged, like it would be pretty good, but because it's bugged, it needs buffs. Is like my stance on it. And if the thing worked as it was expected, this would probably be used a lot. But because it's not, and because your dots don't tick for anything, if you use it with strength, which is like kind of the whole purpose of it, like it needs buffs and it's just generally not good. Ironheart, this artifact is not out yet. I'm gonna be aggressive here and put it and use a lot. Like I think this is a very good artifact, and it's the best artifact of the recent set to come out. Even better than the one that everyone was like kind of talking about. 20% health is a lot of health. That is like your entire set having health on there and your amulet all in one perk that you just sacrifice one artifact slot for. Like that's crazy good. In terms of just living burst. If you are consistently being healed, this artifact will lose value, but 20% health is a good enough amount of health to really push how good this artifact is. And I don't think this artifact will be used all the time for medium builds, but I think people will heavily consider it. I expect bruisers to want to switch over to this artifact next patch, because as a bruiser, if you are using your skills normally without tumbler feet wraps, you should be able to hit the empower cap even without tumbler feet wraps. And most bruisers are trying to pop cleanse and then they're going to go for a Detto, so Ironheart in theory is better. So I think it's going to be used a lot. I think it's borderline overpowered. I think it's like one of the best ones within used a lot. I think Onk's a bit better than the Abyss and Deep Freeze is a bit better than the Abyss, but like it's a very solid artifact. I don't know how I feel about this one because you lose Empower and Fortify. Yeah, and I think that's the one that's like, I think bruisers are like might have a prefer tumbler because of that. But like within a clump, if you want to survive a clump, Ironheart is way better. If you're trying to survive any burst, Ironheart is way better. And I think the really interesting part about it is you can go Ironheart, and then you can just run basically not health on all the rest of your gear, and you can just gain access to more perks. And that's the part that makes it like really interesting to me. Yeah, but if you hit by one Maelstrom, while doing your mail, that's a lot of weekend. True on the PTR patch and the live patch, not true because Maelstrom only works on like one target for some reason while you use it because it's bugged. But on the PTR patch, in theory, that's fixed. I haven't really tested it significantly. Koya, not usable because it's literally just worse than Featherweight. If it wasn't just completely worse than Featherweight, this would probably be in the needs buffs to viable side of things. But as it stands right now, there's not a single reason to use Koya because Featherweight is basically better than it versus elemental damage. So there's just no reason to ever use it. Life Taker is an interesting artifact used by Musket. Feels like one of the stronger offhand artifacts, but it's greedy. I would say this is like in the viable side of things. But it's a little bit on the weaker side. Like I think it's better than Freedom, but it's not like the star of the show, not terrible. It's just a decent artifact to go. Well, when artifact is all out, it should be fixed. I mean, yeah, in theory. Lost Stopwatch. This is like a tanking artifact. Was used briefly for cheese OTK combos that were really silly. I would say it's like on the weaker side of viable, but it's still viable as a tank. Within PvP, this is not viable at all when need buffs. So I'm probably going to rate this in need buffs about where Blood Drinker is. Like the stun duration is like interesting, but there's just not that many stun effects within New World. And the extra half second isn't like great. Yeah, I'm gonna get a free war chest tonight. Well, you can enjoy those the dark matter. The dark matter is honestly the best part about the war chest right now. Like 100 dark matter is a significant amount. Magnetic gauntlets is really weird. It technically belongs and used a lot because it's used by every single IGVG, but it's not used for anything except for IGVG, and it feels like this is only viable on IGVG. And if you're really, really pushing the theory, maybe Spear, because your crits will give you stam. So if you use this to Spear, you'd be able to basically infinitely dodge even more than you're already able to infinitely dodge. But I think that's kind of troll. It still belongs and used a lot. Mag overrated. More ice showers, less stat padded, don't at me. Yeah, that's what I'm putting at the bottom. I used a lot because it's technically used a lot for a certain build, but I don't think it's like incredibly OP. Like, I think there's an argument, and I think this is probably better to put this at the top of viable and then put the tuned leather pants at the bottom. I used a lot. Like, I think a tuned leather pants is just a little bit better than mag gauntlets, if that makes sense. Have my kids. Thanks, Big Daddy Bill. Is JDB throwing it, or are they expecting daddies to chill and not slot? To be honest, I don't know. I'm in JDB, but I haven't gone to a war in a while because they've all been really boring. The mechanic is terrible. This is not viable. Like, if you want to cheese stuff and you want to have fun, like, it's okay, but, like, it's not viable from any practicality standpoint. I'd say needs buffs. Is it? I think if you want to go for a trap build, or if you want to go for a what do you call it, a grenade build, if you do it without the mechanic, you're even better. Like, if you do it with a normal musket, you will do more damage, and you don't lose that much CDR, and I think that's just better. Like, I don't think mechanic is really quite a needs buffs from muskets I've talked to, but I think it's a really fun artifact. 20% CDR is kind of wild. It is, but I still don't think it's good enough somehow. Like, well, mostly just because it just doesn't do damage, and muskets, like, you know, you kind of want to do damage, and there's not many reasons to use a utility musket build. Is freedom still going to be useful for bruisers? As in the perk freedom, I think so, but it kind of depends how many flails you have, and if you can depend on a flail. The more flails you have, the less important freedom becomes. Michael, I think, is at the bottom of needs buffs. This probably needs more buffs than Michael. The one spot where Michael is maybe useful is with Flail, because you get access to 2 proc perks that you normally can't get, not because of the unique perk on Michael. And that's typically not good enough because name 625 flails that have illegal perks tend to be better than Michael. But if those name 625 perk flails did not exist, I think Michael would be interesting, but it's just worse than a lot of the artifact things. Counterattack from Michael was working on my secondary weapon too, kind of OP. Yeah, that's like a bug that exists with kites that I thought was fixed recently, but I haven't checked it out in probably a month. Spark of Mjolnir. It doesn't do damage, or it doesn't feel like it does damage. Like, I would probably put this in not usable about where the mechanic is. Like, it's just, if you want to use it, like, the only spot where this is usable is, like, in Laz, and even then, I think it's probably worse than going a different Warhammer. But it's okay to use in Laz, and that's about it. And it's not like Laz is a super hard dungeon to do. Nimble Coat, I think, is a little bit on the OP side, but barely, like kind of near the bottom of OP. Used by some healers within PvP, used by fire staffs a lot, who are trying to be greedier. Used by healers all the time within PvE, and just in general, kind of nuker mage DPS builds, like pretty much always use Nimble Coat, and I think it's really, really good. I think it's is it a tier better than like Ironheart? I think it's like where Ironheart is, maybe a little bit worse than Ironheart, but it's like in that Ankh, Nimble Coat, Ironheart tier. Like it's very solid. Like I like it a lot. Can you quickly say why the wizard hat is not usable? I rock it with Fire Ice Gauntlet. Because Nimble Coat's just better in that setup. But it's like near the top of near usable, because I think it's like some people I know have used it like for kind of experimental builds, but it's just like outclassed basically, and it's the same problem that Koya has. It's like both these artifacts are just outclassed by other artifacts, so there's not really a point to using them. in my opinion. Nature's Wrath is interesting. This one, I think, confused people a lot. I had the right take on it at first, but I don't think I really explained it super well. Empower expires 200% faster. This means that, and if you have any source of temporary empower, it does not work. I think this will be used a lot in borderline OP because a lot of builds passively have near the empower cap, and for those builds, this is strictly a 20% damage boost. So I think this is more than viable. I think this is going to be used a lot. I think it's going to be used more than Tomb Leather. I think it's going to be used more than the Abyss. More than Deep Freeze, I think it's about an Onk level in terms of where it will be used. It'll be used a lot by ranged builds, like Musket can get near the Empower cap, a Bruiser can get near the Empower cap, and like for those builds that you can get near the Empower cap, like it's passively, it's just very, very good. Within PvE, in theory, if you build your team comp out correctly, everyone should be able to hit the Empower cap with the right setup, and then Nature's Wrath is just a damage boost at that point. So, seems like a very, very solid artifact, but you have to build around it. Odo, I think, is in needs buffs about where Michael is, a little bit better than Michael, probably a little bit worse than Ginge. Passively healing when you're blocking is cool, but it's not great. It has 2 proc perks like Michael, which was the main thing that makes it above average, but I don't think it's quite good enough for the most part. Pestilence. Oh, Pestilence is weird. See, BB I think needs buffs, but Pestilence I would put in either the bottom I used a lot. Like, I think it's used a little bit more than the Abyss, so maybe mid used a lot, but like BB itself needs buffs. Like, this is just like a really good utility-based artifact, makes really good offhand, makes your main weapon do more damage. I think Finisher's better for most builds, but it's like, it's very solid. Even after the nerfs, I think Pestilence is still, you know, more than valuable. It's like, it's very valuable to run it. Because you can go like net shot and net shot just because it's BB and has good utility. But BB itself is really bad. BB is horrid. Yeah. But like, Pestilence is just good because it's like, as an offhand, it's just solid. I was 4 slotted popping bruisers for 5k, bro. It was sick. Does not do enough damage. Phoenix, I think, is the most overhyped artifact of all time. This is where it feels like the community is rating it. I am gonna say it's about where Onk is. I think a little bit better than Onk. Good for any squishy DPS nuker build or healer. And other than that, I don't think it's that insane. It was kind of broken at 2 seconds. I kind of agree. Purify and stamina recovery is really, really good. But like the ability just to live as like a last chance mechanic is really interesting. The thing is like healers already have 0 to like 1, maybe 2, 3 deaths per war, and that's it. So I don't really see it like making a big game changer, but it's like, I think it's going to be used a lot at first, and then this is going to like move off until about where Mag Gauntlets is, where it's going to be used nichely by people, but it's not going to be incredibly OP, and I think it kind of fluctuates a lot there. Probably worse than Nature's Wrath, to be honest. Honestly, it's probably about where the Abyss is. Like, it's, Onk I think is a little bit better. I think it's a decent artifact, though. It's an interesting idea. Seems broken on paper, but I don't think it's gonna really be as broken as a lot of people think it is, just because 1 second for immunity for 180 seconds, where if you're taking damage for that 1 second, you're not gonna get healed anyway, so it seems like kind of niche in most regards. Quick draw gloves, not really usable, but probably the best of the not usables, because I think if you, in theory, were to use it perfectly, it could be kind of good, but it's just like too clunky to like kind of figure out how to time it perfectly. If you buff that glove, it will be OP. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you made this like 1 second instead of half a second, it would probably be used a lot. If it's at half a second, it's just like, it's decent kind of thing. Serenity. Is it okay to put Serenity as overpowered? I think it's okay to put Serenity as overpowered. Even though it's not being used a lot right now, Serenity is a strict upgrade to how Great Axe works, and Greatsword works, and if you're running Greatsword at all, you're either running Serenity or you're not playing Greatsword. And that, I think, qualifies it for overpowered, even though Greatsword as a whole is not super broken right now. It's a strict upgrade and is really good for PvE and PvP. Yeah. PvE, PvP wise, it's literally Abyss. Yeah, exactly. Like, Featherweight's up there, I think, with it. Finisher's up there with it. Endless Thirst, Serenity. Like, I think these are all with it. I think it's a bit more OP than Endless Thirst is. A little bit worse than Finisher, because Finisher is, like, more attuned for the meta. But, like, it's very, very good. You can't really go wrong with having Serenity. Sin, this is the new hatchet. For people that haven't seen it, I'll pull it up here. Sin will have this perk called Defile, which will increase your damage. Has Corruption, which makes your debuff last longer and works on both weapons. Has Kingly Jagged, which is okay. Refreshing Move, which is okay. Not insane perks. It seems like a pretty good hatchet, though, all things considered. And I think this will definitely make its way into PvP, especially for, like, bows. I think this is kind of interesting. Any weapon that's, like, super debuff oriented, I think this is really interesting. Also, it'll be really interesting to see if Corruption works on ultimates. I don't believe it will, but if it did, that would be pretty OP. I think it's, like, overall just, like, a pretty solid artifact. I think this is going to be in that viable category near the top of viable. Yeah, I don't think bows would run that. You don't think EU bows would run that? I think EU bows, like, would probably consider it, but it's not quite good enough. I think it's inviable, though. I don't think it needs buffs. Like, I think it's a bit better than Freya. I missed the spark placement. What makes it so bad? What is spark? I didn't rate spark. Did I rate spark? What is spark? If Defile perk was working with your main hand, it would be literally finisher level. Yeah, true, but it's not working with your main hand, unfortunately. You would use that weapon with a lot of debuff util, but isn't that? You think for Spear it would be viable? Sin with Spear? Because you have Weakens, you have Rends, you have Bleeds, you have Plagues with Plague crits. It would be insane with Spear. Yeah. That's kind of scary to think about, actually. I think it's near the top of viable as like a fair spot to put it for now. This could break the game at one point. Oh, Warhammer? Oh. Oh, Spark and Mjolnir. I always call it Mjolnir. I don't think of it as Spark. It's just... It's good for Lazarus, and that's it. That's where I think about Mjolnir. Like, for PvP, it's just outclassed. It does less damage. That weaken is underrated, in my opinion. It is underrated, but, like, I don't think it's really that good. Spark better for Laz, I think. Hammer so slow. Yeah. Wizard Hat might be usable when they do the mana rework. True. Not right now, though. Scorpion Sting is used a lot still, even after all the nerfs, but I think it's in the bottom of used a lot. Like, it's, like, a little bit... Does it belong in Viable? I think it belongs in Viable more than used a lot. Like, about where Mad Gauntlets is, maybe a little bit under Mad Gauntlets, but it's, like, it's solid. Still, even with the cooldown increase, just because the unique ability is really, really cool. One of the, probably the coolest artifact overall in the game, but unfortunately has been nerfed a lot. Tempest Fury. Creed Boots might be Ghoul Gloves bad. Yeah, I put it right next to Ghoul Gloves. I'm rating the best on the far top left and then the worst on the bottom far right. I think Gladiator is somehow worse than Ghoul Gloves. Tempest Fury is really, really awful. But it's really fun. Which puts it in a weird spot. I think if Tempest Fury had the perk working for like 4 or 5 seconds, it would be really good. But at the current duration it's at right now, it doesn't feel like it works long enough for you to be able to disengage. By the time you're out of your like weapon animation and you start running, it's over within like a second, and that just makes it really, really awkward to use. So it's like, it's good with Whirlwind, but that's kind of it. And I don't like using Whirlwind as an escape as quirky. 3 seconds is kind of low, but I could also see it being okay with higher duration. Yeah, it's like, it's weird. I think this is like near the bottom of viable as an offhand. As a main hand, this is not viable because Whirlwind doesn't do any damage. I think it's near the bottom of viable though, like about where Freya is. It's only 3 seconds because the boost plus Arachne. Otherwise, you get insane haste values. That's a way to build it. That would be a really actually the boots with it's kind of interesting because then you increase your haste durations by 50%, so it'd be a 4.5 second haste. And at that point, it's like a decent haste. I don't know. I'm gonna land it in viable, but I don't expect this to break the meta or anything like that. Tumbler feet wraps is, I would argue, a top 3 artifact in the game. If you're light, featherweight. If you're medium, Tumbler feet wraps. And if you are heavy, just get this out of the way, Void Darkplate. And there's not much of a debate for other artifacts to go. It's just the defensive artifacts that give you a bonus are just very, very good. Tumbler will be competing against Ironheart for that slot next patch, and I think Ironheart is near Tumbler level, but I don't know if it's quite there, but it's near there. Void Darkplate is just crazy because you can do it with any fort stacking build, and it's just passive fortify that can't be stripped. It's just ridiculous. Makes your fortifies even better. This single-handedly has kind of shaped the meta that we have right now. I would argue that it's more impactful than Tumbler just because it's shaped the meta more right now. Debatably better than Featherweight, but I think Featherweight's a little bit more OP than Void Darkplate, but Tumbler and Void Darkplate are very, very near, and I'm only going to put Void Darkplate higher because I think it's shaped the meta right now, but Tumbler's a little bit more viable in more modes, I would say. So kind of biased towards War there in a little bit, but it's also very good in OPR as well. What do you think the best flail perks are? It really depends on what build you're playing for flail. I think there's 4 good flail perks, and Trip is not one of them. And you can kind of mess with them. Like, I think Barrage is really good for certain situations. Smite is really good for most situations. Vortex is really, really good. And Bludge is really, really good. And I think Trip is weaker than that. Ironheart is just Darkplate on M. What do you mean on M? Ironheart, what Ironheart does is Ironheart's a passive health. It's a 20% passive health. Oh, on medium? Yeah, that's basically it. It's Darkplate on medium. Yeah, it's like a defensive artifact on medium that gives it a really big advantage. You can't run this in heavy because this is Walnut in heavy, and you can't run a light set with a heavy piece. That's a legwear. So you have to use this in medium. It's just weird that they like state it this way and they're not like, hey, you can only use this in medium. It's like, hey, you can't use it in heavy. Hey, it's a heavy leg, so you can't use it in light. You have to like kind of figure that out, but you know, it is what it is. Um, should we go back to this? Definitely Ironheart better than Freedom. I mean, I have Freedom down here. I think Freedom's a tier below Ironheart. The wall is interesting. It definitely belongs in used a lot, but I think it's weak. I think the ability to dodge is very, very good for tanks. And the damage reduction received from the wall is worse than Void Darkplate. And the other problem that the wall inherently has is you can't go for a defensive perk on there, like Sturdy Fortification, because it has Keenly Fortified. If the wall did not have Keenly Fortified, I think it would be borderline OP, but with Keenly Fortified, it's weakish. Earring higher than Ankh? Yeah, I think the Earring's better than Ankh for most builds in most situations. Ankh is only like a 10 to 50% heal increase right now. And that doesn't make it completely OP in my opinion. I think it makes it very strong, and it's overused by the community as on the large. But I don't think Ankh is overpowered. It was overpowered at launch, but they reworked it in some ways. I don't think Endless is anywhere near the other 5. I think Endless is. I'm like confident like putting it there because of the perks that it has, because it doesn't extend cleanse, because this broke 3v3. They had to completely rework it because it broke 3v3. It's really, really good in OPR. It's really, really good in war. Like, Endless definitely belongs in overpowered tier, in my opinion. If you full shrinking heals, Onk is still good, but I like Endless. Yeah, if you full shrinking heals, Onk is still solid because it boosts that. But I think Endless is generally better than Onk for most situations. Fortify Toast and Power Toast, like on the same thing, like very, very ideal. Although you can't pop it as often because your pots will, be on a longer cooldown, but it's still decent. Let's see, what do we have left here? We got the Unmoved. Up until recently, I would have put this in not viable. I would now put it in needs buffs. And I would put it better than Ginge. Probably better than Lost Stopwatch, because I think this is decent for how Flail works. I think it's decent for SNS too. But it comes with really awful perks. Like, if the Unmoved had a better perk pool, I think it would be a lot better of an artifact, but Grit Ward is okay, but it's not good for most builds, and Physical Aversion is a dead slot. Like, I think if this had a better perk set, it would be viable. But if it didn't have, because its perk set is so bad, I don't think this is viable. The original take I heard from this on EU that this would be used all the time and would be OP. I'm glad I found your channel. I need to get better at PvP. I need to figure out what gear I need to put on, so I'm actually somewhat competitive in PvP, OPR, etc. Yeah, if you do exclamation point builds, I put the meta war builds in there that I know how they work and how it's slotted. I don't have like bow in there, I don't have musket in there, and a few others, but it has most of the meta war builds, but the war meta is like relatively niche in terms of what's slotted right now. Unyielding almost became good with the buff they did, but unfortunately critting sucks in this game because it just adds to the base damage multiplier and it doesn't multiply everything. So I don't think they can really buff this. I don't know how you buff this. I think it's just not usable because you can't buff it really. Make crits great again? Yeah, like, if crits were good, Unyielding would be good, but unfortunately crits suck. Like, even on Firestaff, crits suck, because crits just add to the base damage modifier, and because people are already at, like, 100%, like, your crits don't really influence your damage that much anymore. Like, crits are used for utility, not for damage. Because that Unyielding, I think, is at the top and not usable, because I think it's, like, almost makes it there, but because of just how crits work within this game right now, I don't think it's usable. If, like, every crit was a flat damage increase, I think Unyielding would be very good. But because it's not, Unyielding is not usable in my opinion. Vengeance. I don't know, where do you guys think this belongs? Is it above Creed Boots or below Creed Boots? I've seen people run this as life staffs in OPR, and I'm like, oh my god, why are you using that thing? Why is Wiz Hat at the bottom? Because it's just not better. Like, it's outclassed. That's the problem with Wiz Hat. Why would you ever go Wiz Hat when you can go Nimble Coat? There's not a single build that you would rather go Wiz Hat than Nimble Coat or Featherweight that I know of. But Wizard Hat itself, I think, is like in the needs buffs category. It's just outclassed directly, so there's no reason to really go it. There's literally no reason to use Creed Boots. Vengeance can at least get used for meme OPR gameplay. Yeah, so it's like Mechanic tier. Is it better than Mechanic in Mjolnir? Maybe. It definitely belongs in that area, though. This last one here is really weird. Really, oh my gosh, I did not pronounce that right. Really weird to rate. Venom seems interesting. Like, your heavy attack should do more. The obvious synergy with Venom. If you look at Spear, you go for Coup de Grace. That's an actual heavy attack. Thing is this 20% that you gain from Venom, from the poison tipped, is not 20% of your damage. It's a 20% damage modifier. And when you're hitting for 150% of your damage, 20% of 150 is a very small amount. So if I'm hitting for like 150 and then, what's 20 of 150, for example? And that's not including these other perks that are benefiting. So that's like 13% on the dot tick. It's not benefiting off of Trenchant Strikes or Trenchant Crits either. So it's like doing like a tenth of the damage, maybe a little bit less than a tenth as a dot for 5 seconds. And I don't think that makes it nearly good enough. I think if this was 40%, it would be used. I think at 30% it wouldn't be used. I think 40 to 50% it would be used, and I would put this in needs buffs, which is controversial, but I think is accurate in terms of its placement. That's a really weird one to look at though, because like trenchant crits and trenchant strikes seem decent. We thought that they would rework the heavy attacks on spear and make them like way better, and then maybe you can go for some weird heavy attack spear build. But no, I don't really see this being great. For like bow, if you were to use this as an offhand, the poison tip feels like it hurts less than like going for what do you call it? Going for the void gauntlet artifacts, which I forget where we put it. Life taker. Like I think life taker is just better than it in most circumstances. You just can't live with venom either, to be honest. Why would they put trenchant strikes on both spear artifacts? I don't know. They just want spears to do heavies. Like there's not a lot of creativity there, and unfortunately, spears won't get another artifact till the third round of artifacts, so they have a long time to wait. And I don't know why they really like heavy spear. OPR meme builds artifact tier, to be honest. Am I comfortable putting it there already? See, I feel like sweep makes it slightly better than not usable, but it's like a meme tier, but it's like a little bit better than the OPR meme artifact tier. Like of like Vengeance, Mjolnir, like Mechanic, like I think it's a bit better than that. But I think, yeah, I think it belongs in need buffs. I just don't know where in need buffs. It's not better than Blood Drinker. It's not better than Unmoved, even though I would like it to be. It's probably not better than Lost Stopwatch, to be honest. Is it better than Ginge? Probably not. Is it better than Odo? Probably not. I think it's better than Michael. Like I think it's like around there, like near the mid to bottom of needs buffs. So, anyone have anything they strongly disagree with on here? I guess starting from the top down, our most OP artifact in the game, we got Featherweight. Then we got Void Darkplate, which I think is arguable to switch with Tumblers. But I think the heavy meta right now and medium not being as good makes Void Darkplate a little bit more valuable to acquire. Running Tumbler in heavy is usually worse than just going Void Darkplate. Then we have Finisher, best artifact in the game in terms of a weapon. Serenity, because it literally is just an upgrade to Greatsword, and is really stupid, to be honest. Like, Greatsword isn't that good right now, but Serenity is, whew. Endless Thirst, because this plus health, and I would say Divine, and, like, either a protection or stamina recovery or something like that on your amulet with Endless Thirst is just incredibly strong. You could also go for Empower on there if you want to do something fancy. Probably the best solo artifact in the game in terms of just being alone within a war standpoint or being within a 3v3 standpoint, 1v1 standpoint, OPR, etc. Endless is really, really good. Ironheart, I think, is going to be used a lot by bruisers. It will be contested with Tumbler. I think Tumbler will overall still be used more because Ironheart's harder to acquire, but I think Ironheart is basically as viable as Tumbler's is. Nimble Coat, super solid artifact as well. Ankh got weaker from indirect changes recently, but, you know, is still basically used by every build in the game, but I think is overhyped. But by overhyped, it's still used a lot. It's like when you talk about NVIDIA, like it's overhyped, but it's still very, very good. Except NVIDIA's not really overhyped, it's just doing crazy things, especially today. Still can't think Endless can't be up there with the others. It actually has a negative condition, is pretty mid for a lot of light armor builds. I think it's good for light armor builds though, because they go Featherweight, and with Featherweight, Endless is good because you have the Fortify. Quick question, looking at your Hammer Great Axe Bruiser build, you suggest Arcane Protection Necklace and Arcane Protection Consumes on Hotbar. Why? That I probably should change the Arcane Protection, but the Arcane Pot is, I think, a little bit better for clump crashes than the Void Pot, but Void Pot's a little bit popular, so that's a little bit off meta. That probably could be adapted. That used to be used, but it's not used as much anymore. Nature's Wrath, I expect to see a lot too. No one's using Void Pots in EU. Really? Because I had heard Jesse tell someone to use void pots. And if Justice is telling someone to use void pots, at least 50 people are using void pots. Nature's Wrath is gonna be pretty good. I think it's gonna be really good for any weapon that has a lot of passive and power, but you are gonna be nerfing your damage if you're not hitting the empower cap passively with this artifact. So it's like very specific where it will be very, very good. But it's one of those artifacts that could make glass cannon builds like very viable again. Deep Freeze, solid. I don't think it's really OP, but it's very solid. Pestilence got nerfed a lot, used to be overpowered, probably belongs in used a lot now. I don't think it's as crazy, but it's still very, very good. Phoenix, probably the most overhyped artifact the game has ever seen. I don't expect this to be used a ton, but I expect healers to try it. Healers already don't die a ton if you're positioning well, but I think it will still be used a decent amount. Any glass cannon build should run this, so I think it's a very good artifact. The Abyss, very popular within small scale, not as popular within war, for better or worse, but if you're running small scale, Abyss with Firestaff is a very, very fun build to play. More than viable, very solid. Phoenix plus Prot will be very good. Yeah, it will. Attuned Leather Pants, very good for PvE. Really good for PvP for DPS builds, especially ones that are worried about the Empower Cap stuff. The Wall, used by basically every single tank that's starting off. I think that more advanced tanks are starting to move off of the Wall to things like the Void Dark Plate. A few doing the Unmoved. I would say the Unmoved feels a little bit quirkier. But the Wall's very, very solid for tanks. It's just keenly fortified. I think holds it back a bit. Sin is a new hatchet that's going to be extending your debuff duration. Seems like it's a very solid artifact. Kind of scared of that with Spear, which is already very good. But will be interesting to see where that turns out. Attuned Leather Pants definitely on the way down. Yeah, I think it could slide a next patch to viable and not to used a lot. But for now, it's still in the used a lot. Bad Gauntlets, very good for IGVG. Other than that, not nearly as good. Even for IGVG, I would argue that there's better artifacts than this because you care about more about your IG cooldowns and your VG cooldowns with IGVG. But if you are not being pressured a lot, it's very, very good for IGVG. Fantastic for OPR. Other than that, like I don't think it quite keeps up with some of the other artifacts. It applies the stun roots, but every ability has a cap in this game. Yeah. I forgot about Sin with the stuns. That's kind of scary too. Wait a second. Wait, you can go Sin with Vault Kick. Has anyone done that yet? Vault Kick's tracking got buffed. It's like a 2-second stun with Vault Kick. It's kind of silly. It'll extend slows, though. Yeah, no, that's going to be so good with Spear, man. It's better for Great Axe, to be honest. Sin plus Great Axe. Dude, the Great Axe hatchet coming back, that would be crazy. We haven't seen that in so long. Scorpion Sting, still used a lot. Reap 7 seconds? Okay, that's frightening. A 7-second slow from Reap, oh god. OPR is going to be cursed. Yeah, it could overtake Pestilence, to be honest. Like, it might be moved to the used a lot. Honestly, the more we're talking about Sin, like, I want to move this up to, like, probably a little bit above Attuned Leather Pants. Like, I think it's a problem there. Like, there's some things that seem very, very scary with that artifact. Nutshot was an 11-second with Sin. Yeah, that's scary. And Nutshot can't be reduced either because of how the cooldown works. Because it's an extended cooldown and they don't actually... That stuff doesn't get reduced by freedom. Oh my god, that's frightening. But BB is just horrible, so surely that's not super good. Like, surely it's, like, above average. I think I'm comfortable putting that with the bottom I used a lot. 350 strength also changing, true. You'll get Netshot back up with double down before the slow duration's even over. You will. Super good, no. Tilting, yes. Which means it's going to be used a lot, right? That sounds like used a lot. Things that are tilting tend to get used a lot. Oh god. That Scorpion Sting, solid. Bolt Caster definitely has fallen off. Butcher, good for tanks, good for a few other builds, but I think is falling off. Life Taker, definitely good and viable, but not nearly as strong as other artifacts. Freedom, more of the same. Tempest Fury is a little overrated in my opinion. I think it's a very fun artifact, but I don't think it's super great. Crippling Powder Bird with Sin? Oh, please, no. Francesca, mostly a PvE one, but very good in PvE. Within PvP, doesn't work super well because it's hard to lock people down with the hatchet, but good for PvE. Throwing hatchet stuff just still is not good enough. It's just worse than bow, so I wouldn't really force it, but it's, viable for PvP, PvE, melee-oriented builds, which is what hatchet's built for. It's the best hatchet within PvE. Inferno, the bug just makes it rough. Gilly's Gravity Gauntlets is basically just worse than Jasper, which you can just put on your actual, what do you call it? On your actual slot for gems. Blood Drinker is pretty interesting. I don't like that song either. Blood Drinker is pretty interesting, but I don't think it's quite good enough because of the weird interaction with abilities. The heal is actually not coded as a lifesteal. It's coded as a heal, which means it gets boosted by Ankh, which makes Blood Drinker worse. The Unmoved, picking up some steam recently, but I think is still very weak. Mostly because of the perks on it, not because the perk itself is not pretty cool. Lost Stopwatch, not quite there. The stuns getting nerfed significantly doesn't help it within PvP. Within PvE, I think is fine. Ginge Head Wrap on the weaker side. Odo on the weaker side. Venom, quirky, but I don't think it's actually going to be used a ton because of how the damage actually works with that weapon. And because there's only really one good way to get a heavy attack off, and I don't think you want to just run Spear for one good way to get a heavy attack off. Michael, I think, could be used for flail at some point, but other than that, not really. Winged Leather Shoes is good for certain builds. PvEers will probably hate me putting it this low, but I don't think this is great for most people. But I think it's really good for certain people. Like if you're an OPR PvEer, Winged Leather Shoes is probably pretty good for you. If you're a Gathering, Winged Leather Shoes is probably pretty good for you. Basically the same reason as OPR PvEer. But like other than that, like I don't really think it quite works out. Blood Drinker needs damage penalty to be removed, but penalty should be heal, so it can compete with Ankh. I think that would make it worse. If they made it so that heals on you were reduced, but then lifesteal was not, it would still not quite be there, I think. It would be interesting, though, because then it would be, like, better for solo queue stuff. But, and I think that would be a cool spot to have Blood Drinker as, like, the, hey, you want to go farm this boss and you have no friends? Like, throw on Blood Drinker and you'll be good kind of thing. But, yeah. We did Leather Shoes. Unyielding. I think would be good if crits were good, but crits suck. For math reasons, I don't really want to go into that because we already went into that. Quick Draw. If they buffed it, it could be OP. Right now, it's not quite OP. Wizard Hat. Used for a few builds. People have been talking about it in the chat today, but I don't think it's quite there in terms of like being really used a lot. But the mana rework that the AGS is planning on doing, it could become better than not usable. It could become viable to use a lot. We'll kind of have to wait and see. Korra is strictly outclassed by Featherweight, so there's no reason to ever use this. I guess if we wanted to use it in medium, you could, but then at that point it's outclassed by Tumbler, so it's just outclassed by other artifacts, unfortunately. This would need to get buffed to about 20 to 25% from 13% right now for it to be viable, in my opinion, which is a very big buff. That is not happening right now. Vengeance, meme. Spark and Mjolnir, also a meme. I wish that was good. It's a really cool looking hammer. Mechanic does no damage. It's strictly worse to use this artifact than it is to use a normal damage-oriented musket with traps and with grenades. So don't force it unless we're trying to do a util musket build, in which case why are you using a util musket build? Creed Boots. Honestly, Creed Boots has been maybe even worse than Google Gloves. The people that thought this would be good are insane. It is not going to do anything. Critting bonus does nothing. 15% for one target off of one hit does nothing. It's bad. Ghoul Gloves. I don't think we need to talk about Ghoul Gloves. It's just beloved in a sad way. And Gladiator, I think, is somehow worse than Ghoul Gloves because you need to use it with SNS basically. And no SNS wants to use Gladiator because there's way better shields in Gladiator. So that's where I kind of rate everything at this point. Top end is way, way, way better than the bottom end of artifacts. Like there's so many artifacts that are just like way more OP than other ones, and it's definitely I think would be a good spot to start if you're trying to like get into PvP and like which ones to get. Like some of them are better for certain builds, like Mag Gauntlets if you're an IGVG player is very good. Scorpion Sting is like decent for certain builds. Bolt Cast is a nice tech option, but most of these artifacts are rated pretty appropriately, and